is, yes. Good evening and welcome to the Audit, Standards and Risk Committee, the newly titled committee. Welcome to everybody in the chamber, members, officers, our guest from BDO, member of the public, and anybody watching on YouTube, as well as those attending by Zoom. Welcome to you. This is my first time chairing this committee. It's the first time chairing any council committee, so be gentle with me, please. Cliff, I'm afraid, has a bad virus and is unable to attend, although he's been active not only during the day but during the night. I've got emails and WhatsApps from him at about every hour during the last 24, I think. So I hope you're better soon, Cliff. I'm sure everybody shares that view. So housekeeping. Fire, Eddie, could you?
Yeah, I'll just give some short fire instructions. So there's no fire drill scheduled for tonight. And if you hear a loud and continuous ring, please make your way down the stairs and to the Knoll Road car park where the assembly point is indicated by a green sign. Do not use the lift, and the exit in the council chamber should only be used as a last resort. And lastly, if you have reduced mobility and the fire alarm rings, please let yourself be known to myself and I will give you some additional instructions.
Thank you very much. One other small point of housekeeping. I sometimes get confused in meeting to myself. There are two Bobs on the top table here. So if you could remember to refer to Bob R and Bob W or some other differentiator.
Yeah.
We'll talk chair, fine. Chair and Bob, that would be good, because otherwise it gets very confusing. So thank you for that. Okay, so the first item of business is minutes of the previous meeting. Oh, sorry, apologies for absence.
Yeah, just very quickly, as the chair has noted, Councillor Betton and Councillor McIntyre are joining online tonight.
Ah, yes. Good evening. Thank you. In that case, then on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Has everybody seen those?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed, I think there's an error in the minutes. It's on page 5, the very last paragraph. It says, furthermore, following discussion, committee members were reassured that officers were confident as to the start balances for the financial years subsequent to 19 to 20. And that was the opposite of the answer I got to my question. I've rechecked it on YouTube, and the reason that the subsequent years draft accounts are not on the council's website, Mr. Watson told me that there's a question about the confidence, and he said there are erroneous figures, and that's a quote, and another quote was, they're not published because we don't have an understanding that we have some confidence in opening balance at 1 April 2020. So that seems to be the opposite of what's in the minutes.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I'm trying to recall the actual statements made. The balances that we have got for the years subsequent to 1920, we are confident that we will have the right starting balances. But what we need to have is a closed position of the 1920 ones, just to confirm that the audited numbers we start from are the correct ones to use. We believe they're the right numbers. But until we have an audited position on the 1920 accounts, they will always remain at that position, as we stated on the website, that until that position comes clear, we can't definitely state they are exactly right. But we are confident we have the right balances.
Right, thanks. I think I understand. So, because I was comparing us to, say, Eastleigh Council, where they publish all their draft accounts. They're a couple of years behind as well on audits. So they publish draft accounts based on starting balances of draft accounts. And I think you told me that we couldn't do that because we weren't confident in the starting balance in April 2020.
Yes, so we can publish them, but there would be a big disclaimer saying that until we have an audited closing balance for 2020 as at the 31st of March, we have that assumption. We can do that, and we are preparing the 2021 accounts, 21-22 accounts that we will release quite soon. The decision was taken before my time that we would not publish until we had an audited set of accounts. I think, without going further into details around some of the questions, and later on, we're still waiting on the confirmation of what we can do with our 1920 accounts and subsequent ones. But as soon as we get that clarity, we will then publish those draft accounts for people to see.
Okay, thanks, and that's coming soon. Thanks.
Councillor.
Thank you. Could I ask, within the next 7 days, that we have published all of the unpublished sets of draft accounts, please, with the supporting paperwork? It may not be relevant under this item, but if there's a more appropriate item, I'd like that all published in the next 7 days, at the very least to this committee, please.
Unfortunately, no, we can't publish those.
Chair, may I come back? Could you explain why?
Yes, because the accountants are still working on those accounts. What you have to do with the accounting systems is annually roll over the balances. We haven't been able to do that because we're still waiting to confirm the 1920 account balances to roll them over. Once we've done that, the accountants are working on producing those accounts with those balances. So I wouldn't want to publish anything that potentially, given the noise we've had around the 1920 accounts and the adjustments that have been made, I would want to wait until I've got a set of accounts that I'm confident are as accurate as they can be in their unaudited position.
Chair, may I come back? My question was published in their current state to this committee, in the current state that they're in. Either they exist or they don't, so it would be nice to see them in their current draft state, please.
The accounts that we're preparing are very much draft working accounts, and they're not in a position where they can be published that anybody will be able to interpret or understand, because the last thing you always do is you compile the accounts from all the working papers and notes that come through.
I'd still like that paperwork in that state published to this committee, please. Are you saying as the Section 151 officer you're refusing to do that?
I'm saying I can't publish the accounts in the state they are currently in.
So it's being refused, just for clarity.
Chair, if I may assist, you've asked a direct question. The Director of Finance has given you a direct answer. I think the matter is now closed.
Just to clarify, the answer is no.
The answer is that it is not possible. Thank you.
You did, but it was sort of covered in that exchange.
I think maybe the last paragraph should be removed, if that's all right, because I understand what Mr. Watson said. So he has confidence in the starting balances, but not enough confidence to publish the next year's draft accounts based on them. So it's maybe a little bit misleading. There is a level of confidence, but it's just not high enough. Is that correct? So maybe the last paragraph could be deleted from the minutes.
Can I have views on that, members? Any views? Are you happy to agree to that? Okay.
We have enough agreement.
But I think we have enough agreement. Yeah. Okay. So, committee minded me to sign those with that paragraph deleted. Thank you. Okay. Declarations of interest. So, any pecuniary or non-pecuniary declarations of interest tonight? Good. Okay. So, public questions. Mr. Bain, thank you for your questions. You've sent a number through, and those have been answered. In discussion with the normal chair, we felt, given the length of the questions and the answers, that it was really a waste of people's time, as they're able to read them, to go through those. Are you comfortable that we do that? Thank you. And you had a fifth question, which was not immediately answered, but is in fact the next agenda item. So,
I think in the interests of making it clearer for everyone, if I just read my question and then I read my supplementary question. As it's now established, following the publication of the Council website on the 12th of September, that the minutes of the executive meeting of the 9th of November 2016 expressly state that the House of Fraser store was acquired for investment purposes, therefore by implication not for regeneration, can the Council and BDO confirm that any diminution in value would be reflected in the usable reserves of the Council? I understand the answer I was given, but I would ask the Council, and I have to pose it as a question, would the Council please look again at 48E in the minutes of the 9th of November, which expressly state, quotes, the Executive was informed that the acquisition was being pursued for investment purposes. It was noted that the proposed purchase was similar to that of St George's Industrial Estate in March 2015, which was performing well. If I can add as a rider, it is my judgment, and I think I now believe that I've been supported by the Leader of the Council, who in this very chamber questioned, in fact, whether any of the acquisitions were for regeneration, that it seems to me imperative that the Council understand completely that any diminution in value is written off through usable reserves. May I just add, sir, that it might not be that the answer can be given today, but I do think that this answer must be given in conjunction with BDO.
if I understand the question, it's about the classification of the investment for regeneration or for investment. Is that right? That's how I understand the question.
And my understanding, and I recognise that the SIPFA rules, which I suspect were written at a time when authorities were not engaged in significant property investment of the sort that we have seen, it is my understanding that the accounting treatment would impact on the usable reserves of this council. And the reason I'm concerned is that if the usable reserves are diminished to the extent that the council starts spending beyond its capacity through the usable reserves, there will be penalties for this council.
I think the council understands that situation. The councillors certainly do, that I've spoken to. But I think there's the question seems to be about the classification, and that seems to be clear from the answer. Is that?
Only that the SIPFA guidance is updated annually by the body, and certainly does take account of the current or the recent set of investment decisions or regeneration decisions taken by councils in the terms of their property acquisitions. In fact, SIPFA were instrumental in providing the guidance to the Treasury and to the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities around what treatment should be.
I'm sure I'm not meant to engage in discussion, but just finally, can I make the point that I think this is something that BDO should seriously consider, because clearly the statement at the time in 2016 was absolutely clear.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we understand the question, but I think the answer stands as it is. You did mention, you did have another question, which you sent through by email, which perhaps we can deal with.
Number two, does the council accept that the entries in the years to March 2018 and 2019, the reserve statement, require more detailed explanation? the usable reserves rose from 21 million to 41 million without any apparent reason, recognising that in both years there was a deficit in respect of the cost of service provision, and the increase is restricted in description 1, legal, 2, investment development. These are large and unexplained numbers. Now, the answer given is quite reasonably that it would not be a good use of resources at the current time, recognising that the accounts for the subsequent years have not yet been published. But my question is to you, sir, do you think it is reasonable that the council should dismiss this very reasonable concern of mine when there was an increase of £20 million in the reserves at a time when the council was not actually demonstrating surpluses? It is quite conceivable, in my view, that the usable reserves have been overstated, and more is the point that I believe that these entries reflect the introduction or the acquisition of the Jersey Property Unit Trust, which, when it is unwound, will require BDO to look very seriously at the entries, some of which they were not responsible for because it was the time when KPMG were undertaking the audit. But we know from the history of the audit is that KPMG had a very different interpretation from BDO in terms of the property acquisitions and the treatments relating thereto.
Okay, thank you for that. That's an extension from the original question which you sent earlier. I must say I looked at the accounts and I look back. I wasn't around at the time.
May I
it made
just have
some sense to me, but maybe Mr. Watson can respond to that.
These are issues which I think the council will have time to reflect upon. No point making any statement today.
I think we'd be happy to reflect on that. But there are, I think, more pressing things today.
Chair, I'm not sure if it's just me, but we've lost audio externally. I don't know if nobody's pressing buttons.
Sorry, somebody's not on mute, I think.
I beg your pardon.
I think you have answers to questions 3 and 4, and we really need to move on.
No more questions?
Yeah. Not at this stage, but you're welcome back next time and to ask some more.
I think that's quite bizarre. It didn't start till 10 past.
I think you need to check your watch.
Chair, sorry, I don't know whether people in the council can hear us, but we're unable to hear the chamber online.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear now, thank you.
Maybe that one of the microphones was switched off.
Councillor McIntyre, was that literally just within the last minute?
It wasn't, we haven't been able to hear the last few minutes. So we weren't able to hear Mr. Bain's last comment, although we could see him. But we can hear you now.
Okay.
Didn't have his mic on the whole time.
Sorry?
Didn't have his mic on the whole time.
Yeah, we think perhaps the mic wasn't on all the time. That's the only explanation. There's nothing planned about that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, sorry, it's revised agenda, isn't it? printed one I've got has not got the,
Is there a revised agenda?
yeah, we need to cover the,
Okay, so
yeah, it was revised to add in the Treasury.
One's given half an hour for the questions. Half an hour for public speaking.
I'm sorry, I don't think,
Half an hour.
I don't think so.
It is half an hour.
I don't think so. I will review it.
okay, all right.
So, Mr. Bateman, sorry, I'm new to this, and the procedure is also new for public questions. My understanding of the procedure is that you are allowed a supplementary for each of your questions. So it's not a question of time, but of time and or the number of supplementaries. So we think you've asked 3 supplementaries. So if you'd like to ask a supplementary for the 4th question, I'm comfortable with that on the advice that I have. Could you turn your microphone on, please?
Could you clarify that for me? What you're suggesting is that because my 2 supplementaries, basically, in your judgment, were 2 questions, making 4, I can't then ask questions 3 and 4, as was set in the...
I thought
in the
you'd
agenda.
asked 3, and so I wanted to allow you another 1, so that you get 1 supplementary for each of your questions.
Can I just clarify? Can I make a point? I think it might explain why there's a problem, if that's okay.
Yeah, please, microphone.
I think Mr. Bain is expecting to read all his questions out and then ask a supplementary. I think at the beginning of this meeting, you said that you'd had a conversation with Mr. Betton, that you'd explained to Mr. Bain that you weren't expecting him to read the questions out because they were long and the answers out long. So I think that is where the problem is, because when we did them at P&F, we got the member to ask the question and read the answer out. It was long-winded, but that was what we agreed to do. What you've agreed to do is different to that, so that's where the confusion is going. So Mr. Bain is expecting to read his questions, which he hasn't had the chance to do.
Thank you.
I hope that clarifies the point as I see it.
Can I just say something? If I'm permitted.
Please.
The questions are 125 words or less, so the questions were very precise. The answers were extremely extended and long-winded. If I just asked a supplementary question, anyone viewing would have no understanding of why I was making the supplementary point, and I suspect, with no disrespect to the people sitting in this room, I suspect that unless they were overly keen, they would not have understood the question because they probably hadn't read it. So I think it was important to set the context and also then ask the supplementary question. And the questions really could have been, I agree, could have been very much shorter if I was able to engage directly with the auditor. But unfortunately, the auditor, when I wrote to him on the 26th of October, copied to the Member of Parliament, the Levelling Up Secretary, BDO would not answer my question. And that is why I'm now making reference to it in question 4. All of this would be very, very simple if this council just answered very simple questions from residents. For some reason, it won't answer questions from residents, so therefore residents are forced to come here and make commentary.
I think you made your point, Mr. Bain, on that.
I accept your decision, sir, and I will leave now, but I hope that there are people here who understand that it is extremely irritating to raise a perfectly credible and sensible question about the accounts of this authority and not get answers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bain. I think I'd like to point out that the councillor does believe it has given you answers. Bye-bye. Oh, God knows. Are we still quorate? Because we've only got what's a quorum for the... Thank you. So we're on to the Treasury
Management report?
Treasury Management Report.
Mr. Watson.
Yeah, so Mr. Watson, can you cover that topic?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to present this report. This is an information report reporting back on the performance of the Council's Treasury management activities during the second quarter of the financial year 2023-24, covering the period the 1st of July through to the 30th of September. As the report confirms, we have not breached any of our prudential indicators that we're required to, nor any of our management indicators around Treasury. This report previously was only produced twice a year as a management report, once at the half-yearly point and then at the end of the year as the outturn report, and that then was preceded by the annual Treasury management strategy that is presented to full council. The recent review of the committees and committee workloads has delegated this report now to this committee, Audit, Standards and Risk, which in my own view is probably the place where it does sit best. And we are now required by the CIPFA code to make sure we report on a quarterly basis around Treasury management as opposed to half-yearly and year-end. So there'll be another report at the end of the third quarter and then the outturn report. The Treasury management strategy, which goes to council as part of the budget setting, is one of those reports that cannot be delegated by the council to any other committee. So that will be coming to the council as part of the medium-term financial strategy at its meeting on the 21st of February 2024. The report is an information report, as I said, stating where we are with our expenditure on Treasury loans and also our investment policy. Our borrowing has slightly moved. We're now at 167.2 million as at the end of September. And we have weighted averages of debt, which was a request from the last executive, at 2.73% for our long-term debt and 3.51% for our short-term debt. That obviously reflects the current situation around the currently higher than normal or higher than previous interest rates that based on the Bank of England base rate. We try to manage those where we can by firstly converting more to long-term debt when we could, but also by forward dealing and trying to get better deals and predicting potentially with the use of our advisors where we think interest rates will go in the future. It is a case now that we did budget for the rates to be higher this year as part of our Treasury management strategy and our annual budgeting, and hence why we're using part of our equalisation reserve for interest to cover that cost off. We will then predict obviously where we think we're going to go over the next annual budget and a forward look over the next 3 years in our medium-term financial strategy, due to be published again to Council on 21st of February. Other than that, we have a variety of investments that we make. We don't invest long-term, because most of our investments are using the short-term cash balances. So basically we're investing the movements in our cash flow over short-term periods, and at the end of September we had £15.5 million invested in our various funds around there. There is more detail around the interest rate and economy update from our advisors, which is at Appendix 2, which I think is hopefully you can read. I don't want to go through and read it all to you, but if you do have any questions on it, please contact either myself or one of my team.
Okay, do we have questions on Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. So the total borrowing is 167.2 million at the end of that quarter. I think at the end of the previous quarter it was 176 million, so it seems to have dropped, is that correct, by about 9 million? Is that a result of the interest equalisation reserve being used to finance the short-term debt that was maturing?
Thank you, Councillor. No, the interest equalisation reserve is used for balancing the interest payments and not for repayment of debt. The reason why the debt will have come down during this part of the year is, as you know, we collect our council tax over a period of 10 months. So during the year we tend to have more money in. So that is why we hold a certain element of short-term debt to allow us to pay that down, and then we'll take probably out more short-term debt at the point in time. So that's why we hold a balanced portfolio.
Councillor MacDonald, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Probably a question for Mr. Watson. Under section 3.3, and thanks very much for putting in those short-term weighted averages. I note it's short-term debt weighted average is 3.51. What was the assumption for the short-term weighted average in the 2023-24 medium-term financial strategy, more or less?
It was around about 3.5% is what we were looking at around it at the time. It's not an exact science trying to predict where the rates are going to go, and I think there's probably quite a few people far more skilled and paid far more than myself who have been caught out by some other interest rate predictions. The amount of money we set aside from the drawdown of the interest equalisation reserve was an estimate by myself as the person who looks at the reserves, and the intention is it is a budgeted estimate. What we will actually do at the end of the year is, because it's a prudent estimate, we'll only draw down what we actually required. There is a upside to the longer interest rates being held higher, in that our short-term deposits, and you can look at some of them there, are actually achieving more than we thought they would, because again, as we thought the other rates may come down, so will the amount we can lend at come down. They've held up well. So at the end of the year, which is what we do with all our reserves, is we'll look at the requirement of what would you have to draw down. Now, obviously, if we have to draw down more than we predicted in the budget as an estimate, then that will become part of the outturn report, reporting that we probably had to draw down more from either the interest equalisation reserve or our general fund balance. But at this point, I'm fairly confident we have a prudent estimate of what we need to draw down.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Chair, I have a couple of follow-ups, but I'm happy to come back if that's helpful.
No, I'm happy to take those now,
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This one's less numerical, but under 5.4, I'm just wondering, and I'm conscious of the fact that when this report was done, and obviously breaking news today, so just keep that in context. But is the statement there consistent with the latest Bank of England decision and forecast, which obviously has happened since the report was published, in your view? Because I noticed further on in the report, it does comment that you believe that sorry, not you, the crystal ball gazer that we employ believes that rates will stay fairly high through to the middle of 2024. I'm just wondering whether that's still consistent with the Bank of England's signals today.
Again, our advisors hold that opinion. I am guided by them. It is the medium to long term we're talking about. So we're probably talking in 2 to 4 years where we start to see rates come down. And that is what they are predicting, that the Bank of England and also the OBR are saying that as inflation comes down, then there will be, with a suitable lag, a reduction in interest rates, as the Bank of England will stop trying to manage inflation through keeping rates held high. The Bank of England today said, and they said last month and the month before, that they don't expect to bring rates down. So at the time of drafting, we were working on the premise that it would be the midpoint towards it, or maybe even towards the end of the next financial year, that we'll see any significant reduction in rates.
Thank you. 11.3, you'll be glad to know only one more after this one. 11.3 discusses that we endeavour to go for ethical investments. I'm just wondering when the opportunity is for the administration to mandate that in terms of the process. Mr. Watson?
Yes, 11.3 is written, we'll always consider investing funds in the most ethical way wherever practical. And the reason it's written in that way is because we cannot, with our amounts that we invest, mandate what the money market funds consider investing in. We will always ask them where they go, and I do regularly talk with our advisors around where they are. The issue is money market funds are our primary source for short-term lending, purely because they are AAA rated, and my priority for the council's funds is security of the funds, followed by the liquidity, and the yield comes into it. Now we have that look and say, well, you know, if we take away some of that security by looking at a more ethical way of investing, it's a risk the council will have to bear around it. The administration is quite within its rights to mandate where we invest our money. However, I have a duty to the local taxpayer to make sure that the money is placed in secure institutions that will guarantee us, as much as we can, the money coming back to us as and when we need it. So we can't mandate where these funds invest their money, but most of them will have an ethical policy statement on their own fund and their websites, which we do check to make sure where they are. We are not obviously trying to invest it in there. It's the same policy that's followed by virtually every council in the country, and probably more so by the local government pension funds, which are the largest pension fund investors in this country, I think 7th in the world. They do consider the ethical reasons and where they invest, but they don't have that ability. They have more power with their buying. Unfortunately, our 15 million doesn't give us that power.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. But last one, thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for your patience with me. Just want to understand, and it kind of links back to Mr. Bain's questions, I suppose, or some of the background to his questions. Are there any implications to Surrey Heath Borough Council's commercial loans? For example, the two roughly more or less 25,000 Phoenix loans, which I think are the only two, from the ongoing lack of external audit sign-off saga, or any other associated covenants or conditions the members should be informed of, conscious of the fact that 23, no, I can't remember the number exactly, but I think it's 23 of the 35 are new and didn't live through the setting of setting these up. And if such information is commercially sensitive to the council, then perhaps a written answer to members could be provided.
Certainly can't.
The answer to the question is yes, I've had questions around our lack of accounts on there. I've dealt with transactional bankers around it. They've been in contact with myself and my team. We have provided them with information around our future accounts, and at this point in time, they are certainly happy to continue providing those services. Similarly, the people who control the Phoenix loans have been in touch with me, and I've gone back to them and reassured them around this. It is key to understand that local government doesn't borrow on its assets. It borrows on its status as a tax-raising authority, and it has that pseudo sovereign rating, the same as UK government. As we're well aware in the media, there are a number of councils that have stated that their futures are potentially at risk as the government does not permit local authorities to go bankrupt at this point in time. I don't know what they're going to do in the future. They will force interventions into it. They will support and put plans in there around it. So, yes, we get questions. Yes, we have indicated when we are like to publish the accounts to these people, and we have spoken to them at length to reassure them where they are. And so far, everyone I've spoken to has come back and said, thank you very much. The banking sector does have to talk to its clients or people it lends money to make sure they're there. But again, the reassurance that we have income that comes in that allows us to continue to service our debt is what reassures them, as opposed to our asset values.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I take a lot of confidence that we retain our AAA status, effectively. That's what you said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you had your hand up a moment ago? And then go.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. So, looking at the Appendix 1, short-term borrowing, it looks like 36 million, so most of the short-term borrowing matures this month, and the current interest rates on that, on average, is less than 3%. The most recent short-term borrowing taken out, the interest rate, annual interest rate was 5%, so more than 2%. So 2% of 36 million is £720,000. So is that going to be the increased interest that's going to be paid for the next 12 months? Have I worked that out right? Or just on that 36 million alone?
It can be, if you take that as the calculation where we go through on it. What we have been doing as a team is forward dealing with people, which gives us certain certainty around the rates we're lending at, and also gives the person who are lending us the money the certainty, which allows us to get a more favourable rate than the current Bank of England base rate sitting at 5.25. So we're doing those deals where we can. As we remarked earlier, we've taken down the amount of short-term borrowing we have through our cash flow purposes. So rather than leaving 15 million out, we've reduced the amount we put out, because that was around about 2022 at one point, to bring that down. We'll continue to manage it through that, but it was recognised that we would always see some of the lower rate loans that we had going out last year come back and be relet at higher rates. The intention or hope will be that when interest rates start falling again, we can take the opportunity of it. And for example, 2-3 years ago, we were borrowing short term at potentially 0.15%, which is why we have this balance between short term loans and long term loans. We are now at the top or the bottom, we want to look at it, of where we think the interest rates are going to be, and will start coming back down again, which is why the interest equalisation reserve was created when we had surpluses coming through from our interest because we're paying low rates. We put money into the reserve. Now we're paying more. We're taking money out of that reserve, which is the idea of the equalisation reserves.
Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, I think also Councillor MacDonald mentioned earlier, but in 5.2, it does say that interest rates are expected to be elevated for some little while, which is kind of a strange way of putting it, but we're not expecting the interest rates to start dropping in the next 6 to 12 months, are we?
I would suggest they're more likely to start coming down in about 12 months' time. The forecast is this sort of time in 2024.
Yeah, and in the meantime, nearly all of this short-term borrowing has to be refinanced at a higher rate than it's currently at, as you've already said.
Indeed,
I'm sorry,
yes.
I think you've answered that.
No, I agree, yes. We do our best to manage it and do what we can, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Cope.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, a lot of the conversation focused on interest rates, which I think is seen as kind of the key risk for local authorities. And I just want to revisit this sort of interest equalisation reserve. Do I take it from sort of your comments that we feel there is still a bit of flex in that reserve to deal with these upcoming interest rate fluctuations? I understand that might be a slightly speculative question to answer. But if you can't answer it now, when will we know how much we need to sort of put aside or how that reserve is dealing with interest rate fluctuations?
Thank you, Councillor Cope. It is something that we will be, not considering, we will deal with when we produce our medium-term financial strategy that is presented to Council in February. We will have a prediction of where we are. In terms of the health of the reserve, if my memory serves me rightly, at the start of this year, it was 7.6 million. We have anticipated, and again, a very prudent estimate of drawing down potentially 2 million of that, which will then leave us with 5.6. We would then look to draw down more again for the longer rates down there. I think last year's medium-term financial strategy predicted using a further million of that reserve. That will probably have to be revised up. But again, the idea of the reserve is to be there for that equalisation, and that's why we put aside, I believe, a large prudent amount into the reserve to get us through it. Now, obviously, if these rates stay higher for longer, then we have to look at where else we go to it. But the idea of it is to smooth the impact on the taxpayer, so we're not seeking high council tax increases just to pay for the interest costs we've got, potentially because we've already put money aside to cover that off.
So it sounds to me like, you know, you think we're going to say 5 points, have 5.6 left in that pot at the end of this year, you know, roughly. So based on the drawdown of 2 million this year, how long, in your opinion, would that funding deal with interest rate fluctuations, assuming that, you know, our advice is right and it's flatlined for a year and then starts to come down?
As I said just now, we earmarked aside £1 million in the MTFS year 2, which now becomes year 1. I'm expecting I'll probably have to add to that, probably to the tune of £1 million again, so another 2 million, after which point we should start to see the interest rates come down. If we don't, then we have to then consider where else we go. But I would suggest that that reserve will probably sustain us over the medium-term financial strategy that we're going to set, at least, at which point in time we would, as all predictions are showing from the experts, that we would see lower interest rates, possibly not down to the rates that we had, which were unprecedentedly low over the last few years prior to the current increases. But there should be enough then to allow us to return. Now, don't forget, the money that's gone into that reserve hasn't come from the balance of interest in, interest out. The money that's gone into that reserve has come from the achievement of income from our portfolio around the property. So when the portfolio is making money, we would then expect to see that money going in. So it's not just the interest rate bounce we're looking for, to use the term. It would also be seeing the cyclical market of property starting to come back up, which hopefully would allow us to then make a surplus over and above our cost of financing to replenish that reserve going forward.
Okay, any more? I think we're asked to note.
Councillor MacDonald's got his hand up.
It's gone back up again.
A legacy hand.
Is that a legacy hand, Councillor MacDonald, or do you have another?
No, it isn't. It's a new one stimulated by Councillor Cope's investigation of the reserves. Just to continue with that logic, Mr. Watson, if the property trends go the other direction, as we have seen with lower utilisation rates within the square, lower rental incomes as well, that will start draining that reserve in the same way, will it?
The drain on the reserve will be the interest rates that we pay. The ability to replenish the reserve depends on the way our property income goes. We have, in my view, a balanced portfolio around it. So whereas some areas of the portfolio are not contributing as much as we'd like them to, other areas are covering for it, and that's why we run the balanced property portfolio. But as you say, if the market continues to go down and get worse, then the draw on reserves will become different, and we'll have to consider whether we use other reserves to keep the council solvent and functioning as a council.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Okay, then. In that case, we're asked to note the report. Is everybody in agreement with that? Agreed. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Internal audit and charter and manual. So, Mr. Middleton, can I perhaps ask you, as we discussed this at some length with the chair on Tuesday, if you could give us a brief introduction to the need for the charter and why we're doing it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so basically, the internal audit function of the council, we operate to a set of standards. They're called the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, and they're basically internationally recognised for internal audit teams to deliver on. Now, the standards require local authorities to have in place a mandate, or in other words, a terms of reference, which we call an audit charter. Now, that audit charter is already established in the council. We wrote an audit charter a few years ago, and it was presented to the senior management team and members a few years ago. The charter is slightly out of date now because it's 2 or 3 years old. So I felt that it was prudent at this stage to make some revisions to the charter to make sure that the charter is a bit more up to date and a bit more focused. So I've highlighted in the report a few key changes. The new charter is adopting the corporate template. The charter is reinforcing that the standards are mandatory rather than nice to haves. There's a clearer focus on the work of the audit team to combat fraud and corruption. There's title changes and committee name changes in the charter as well. I tried to make a clearer understanding of what the reporting lines are in the charter in terms of direct report to the audit chair, the Section 151 officer and the chief executive. The standards require a clearer definition of what we consider to be definitions for a board and senior management. So in our case, the board we class as the audit committee, and senior management we report into the senior management team. So the charter makes it clearer as to what those are. I've strengthened up and made the section on data sharing more robust to make it clearer what the requirements are. And there's a new section in the audit charter on quality assurance. So basically, Chair, those are the key changes to the charter. But the key thing to bear in mind is the standards require us to have a charter. And the charter, as I say, is already established. But I thought it prudent to bring it to committee. So committee have the opportunity to look at our charter so they can see what our mandate is and basically our reason for being at the council and how we operate. Now, if I could just add, in terms of the audit manual, so the audit manual really supports the charter. So the audit manual is a set of detailed instructions, procedures, processes. There's a flow chart in it, and basically it guides the internal audit team in how we operate the audit function. There's no requirement for the standards to have an audit manual or indeed bring it to an audit committee. But I felt since I was bringing the audit charter to committee this evening, because the two go arm in arm or hand in hand, I thought it was relevant for, again, members to have sight of what we consider to be our processes and procedures, so that members have a clearer understanding of what our work entails and how we go about delivering our work. So I think that's it in a nutshell. But I think the report asks members to note and agree both the audit charter and the audit manual, and I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I think it adds to the transparency that we seek to deliver. Questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and thank you for the really comprehensive charter and manual. I almost feel churlish pointing out the one tiny misprint that's in it, because I went through it in great detail a number of times, and it's really thorough, it's really well written, and it's clear what the objectives are. I'll mention it. It's page 32 on the audit workflow sort of flow chart in the no column. I think there should be a word after substantive, maybe measures or something like that is missing, but I mean, that's all I could find after going. On page 32 of the agenda pack, which is actually page 14 out of 24 of the manual, and it's part of the audit workflow. And the right-hand column, where a service cannot be broken down into operational areas, I think there's just a word missing after the word substantive. It might be measures or something like that, but that is literally all I could find. It's not really what we were meant to do, I suppose, but I really appreciated it, and just to compliment you on the work. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Echoing Councillor Richard Wilson's comments, one quickie question. Under 20.1, it references IT security policies that everyone should be familiar with. Would you be comfortable sharing a copy of them with me so I'm aware of them?
Our current IT security policy?
Yes, it says there, to ensure there's an adequate control framework in place, all staff should be mindful of the following policies and procedures. So I'd quite like to see a copy of the IT security policies, if that's okay.
I have no problem with that, subject to if that's included within the rules. Yeah. Yeah. Is it on the council website? Possibly, no.
But sorry, we can't hear you, Chief Executive.
Okay, just with councillors, yeah. So if you're happy for me to pass it over to the audit chair, and then the audit chair can circulate it as appropriate, is that reasonable?
Absolutely, I appreciate it's not a document. I think you were saying you wouldn't want it in the public domain, and I completely support you in that for very obvious reasons.
Councillor MacDonald, you've got your hand up.
I have. Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to agree with everything that Councillor Wilson says. So thank you, Mr. Middleton, for your diligent work. It is, though, however, a red letter day, because I think I might have found one or two things Mr. Wilson didn't, which is, I think, in a couple of places, if you do a word search, you'll see it refers to the committee as an audit standards and risk scrutiny committee. I think we are not a scrutiny committee here, or sorry, the committee isn't because I'm not part of it. It is not a scrutiny committee. So could we just do a quick word search and find the two places I think where that is stated. And then so that was my question, and I think it's probably a point of clarification back to probably Mr. Roberts, I suspect. Is I noticed in the report for this one and for I think the Treasury report, we don't have comments from the Section 151 officer for this, and we don't have comments from the monitoring officer on this one. And for the Treasury report, we don't have comments from the Section 151. Is there a constitutional legal reason, requirement that we do, or it can just be left blankety blank?
Chair, if I may. Thank you, Councillor MacDonald, for your question. I think these reports are here for noting, and so there's no decision. I would prefer to have those comments provided, but it's essential that they're provided when members have been asked to make a decision.
Thanks very much for the clarification. I just spotted it and thought I'd ask as a learning point for us all. Thank you.
Yes, I think semantic, we are being asked to agree it. That's not the same thing as noting it, is it? Or is it?
No.
Okay. Any other questions on that? In that case, can I ask if we're happy to have reviewed and agreed the updated audit charter and audit manual? Agreed. Thank you. We move on to the results of the audit process. Again, Mr. Middleton, we went through this with the chair in some detail on Tuesday, but again, if I could ask you to sort of summarise this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members may recall that 1 or 2 meetings ago they asked the internal audit team to present the internal audit recommendations to committee. So I presented those here. So what we try and do is we operate an 18-month rolling programme. So any audit recommendations that have been satisfactorily implemented tend to get taken off the spreadsheet, and obviously all the new recommendations get added. Members will be minded that we operate a 3-category categorisation system for audit recommendations. So essential, those tend to be the highest level, probably needing priority or immediate attention. Then we've got the desirable recommendations or medium rating. And then we've got the best practice recommendations or the low rating. So we operate a RAG system, so red, amber, green recommendations on that basis. The report annex shows all the recommendations, as I said, that we've raised over the period. Now, for discussion, there are 4 outstanding. So I think the first thing to bear in mind is the 4 overdue recommendations that are presented in the table. None of those are essential, so they're all desirable. So the good news is all essential.
Could I just ask if we could perhaps take questions on what you've said in terms of the process of tracking and things, and then we'll perhaps come back to the details of the 4?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Is that okay with members? So any questions on that rolling nature and how that's done? Good? Okay.
Okay.
Carry on with the 4. Yes.
Okay, yeah, so 4 overdue recommendations. They're highlighted in cream or beige. So if I just very quickly summarise each of those 4 for members' purposes. So the first one, line 39 on the spreadsheet. This relates to the information governance audit. So the recommendation related to the INSPIRE regulations. So for those that aren't familiar with the INSPIRE regulations, they're a bit similar to the FOI regulations in that the council needs to take action from requests from members of the public in a similar way to FOI requests, but the INSPIRE regulations focus more on geographical or spatial data. Now, the good news to date is the council's had very few, if any, requests for Inspire information, and they have all been dealt with under the FOI regulations up to now. But when we did the audit, the audit team were of the opinion that the council could treat the Inspire regulations slightly differently. The majority of those recommendations have now since been actioned, and action has been taken by the senior management team and the information governance team in a proportionate way. So the action taken is proportionate to the fact that the council is getting very few requests from the public on those. However, it has left one recommendation relating to the opportunity for the council to provide clearer information on its website about how it tackles Inspire regulations, consider whether any fees and charges should be attributable to those requests or whether they could be absorbed within the FOI regulations. As I said, that recommendation is still outstanding, even though it's a few months old. We have spoken to the service at length on this recommendation, and the information governance manager has assured us that they are currently looking at the website with a view to make it more fit for purpose and make sure that it covers the Inspire regulations whilst absorbing it under the FOI regulations. So that's the first one outstanding. The second one covers debtors. So this relates to how the council actions sundry debtors. So if the council takes its normal course of action to do debt recovery, when all those reasonable steps have been taken and the debt still remains outstanding or unpaid, the council reserves the right to send some of those cases to the Credit Protection Agency or another debt recovery agency. They operate techniques slightly differently to the council, and the council has referred cases to them over a few years with some success. And what we said in the audit is we need to take the opportunity to stand back and reflect on that success and see how the service is being performed or delivered by this CPA, because it is up for renewal on the 1st of April next year. So rather than just continuing with that arrangement, there may be the opportunity to test the market or certainly review how that performance is being delivered by the CPA. So that piece of work hasn't yet been actioned by the finance team, mainly due to capacity and resourcing issues. But again, we did discuss the issue with them, and we've got an update from them that they will review all the CPA's performance before the contract is due for renewal by April next year. So that's the assurance we've got from them. And again, that's just a desirable recommendation, not essential. The third recommendation, scrolling down, line 124, well, actually, the last two relate to the most recent insurance audit. There were a number of recommendations, as you can see in the table, that related to the insurance audit, and the vast majority of those has since been actioned, so that's positive. However, it has left two recommendations that are still overdue, so if I could just briefly summarise those. So the first one recommends that the corporate property provide an explanation for an approximate 12,000 variance between invoice and journal amounts in respect of insured commercial properties for 21-22. This piece of work was being done by the council's previous chief exec. He's since left. And Bob Watson has mentioned that the service has undergone a restructure or a stabilisation piece of work, and they've got new people in place, and they're actually looking at the variances to make sure that they're being properly accounted for over the next few weeks, over the next few months. So that covers that one. The last one on insurance relates to facilities. So the resources within the facilities team assist both the corporate property team and the finance team to actually be the conduit between the council and the council's insurers, Sutton, in terms of providing information around property and assets on asset registers that assist in the delivery of all risk registers. That piece of work wasn't up to date at the time of doing the audit, so we have since spoken to the head of service for property, and they've got in place now a new facilities manager, and they're going to take on that piece of work to make sure that the resources are in place and available to make sure that the all-risk information that Sutton, as our insurance provider, needs is actually fit for purpose and up to date. So as I said, that piece of work is slightly outstanding as well, but arrangements are in hand with the Council's Head of Service for Economic Development, working with the facilities team and the finance team to make sure that that action has been implemented in due course. But the rest of the recommendations in the report have all been implemented. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and congratulations to have only 4 when I saw the long list. That's quite an achievement for the council. I think. So, questions on that?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the first insurance one that's overdue, it's a £12,000 variance, and it's kind of got lost in the weeds of so many people changing jobs and high turnover over that time. Is it possible that it could have been fraud that somehow caused that 12,000 variance?
I couldn't say for sure. I suspect not. Looking at the figures from the testing, it does seem to be focusing more on accounting issues and where the postings have gone to, rather than actually, I haven't got any reason to suspect it was fraud in any way. None of the rest of the records actually would point to that in any way. So it's the most probable explanation would be an accounting difference, as I said, which is currently being looked at by the interim finance consultant.
Okay, any more questions on that, Councillor MacDonald? Oh, Councillor Lee was first.
To be fair, I think Councillor MacDonald was faster than I am, afraid.
Okay, Councillor MacDonald, while your Zoom is working. And we can't hear you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just really to compliment Mr. Middleton on managing that process. Obviously, a lot of actions there. But I think, as we all know, the hard yards have been done by the people that got the actions. So well done for them for getting them cleared. To have just a handful left is brilliant, and I think gives the whole council some confidence that it's being managed properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Couple of questions. So I wanted to delve into a couple of the items that weren't sort of highlighted in colour. So if I read it, because I don't have numbers next to them, so this one's under insurance. It's recommended that insurance invoices to the council commercial properties are dealt with in a reasonable time to ensure the assistant account system, to enable the assistant accountant, in brackets, system to properly account for these transactions in a timely manner. Could you give us a little bit of background on what that issue was? Was it invoices not being logged on the account system before they were being paid, or were they not being logged until after they were being paid?
Thank you, Councillor. From memory, bearing in mind the audit was done quite a while ago, I think from memory it's more a timing issue. So I think there's no irregularity of invoices not being paid. I think in terms of the audit testing and where they were on particular invoices, it was more the timing issue and making sure that the council was following its own procedures for actually making sure that the invoices were being processed in line with their requirements.
So they were being paid but not necessarily put on the system, is what you're saying? I just understanding what the impact of the issue
Yes, I have
was.
no doubt the invoices weren't paid, but it was just more a timing issue, I think.
Councillor Lee, I think what we're talking about here is invoice comes in, the invoice gets paid by the transactions team of the council as it's required to do within a timely measure. What then happens is we have to allocate that invoice out to all the various properties that we have. What the request or the audit observation is saying that we need to get to the accountancy team the allocation of where those invoices need to go in a timely manner, so we can then attribute the cost of that invoice to the appropriate properties.
So, Mr. Alex Middleton, Do you agree then it was an issue of cross-charging as opposed to an issue of logging the invoices on the system? I'm just trying to get to the nub of what the issue was.
Thank you. Yes, I believe that to be the case. Obviously, a lot of activities and services across the council, and as Mr. Watson said, it's making sure that we correctly allocate or apportion the spend across the council. And again, that's a timing issue, and that's why I focused on the timing in terms of the wording, the recommendation, rather than inaccuracies or doing things not in compliance with the services procedures and set of guidance notes.
Thank you.
Okay, then. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. Mine's a basic question. Looking through the risk register, which echoing comments of fellow councillors, obviously a lot of hard work's gone into this, and well done to everybody involved, because it's quite a comprehensive list. My only comment is reference the right-hand column where there's lots of colours. Is there a reason for that? Should they be carried over? Have I missed something?
I can come in on that one.
Oh, okay. Because I was trying to make out if it's a RAG rating or...
No, there is no sense to it. Basically, when I was transferring it from Excel to PDF, that was a byproduct.
Fine. Thank you. I knew it was something easy.
You're not the only one. I had the same question, and I'm colourblind, so I was in deep trouble with that. So before we're asked to...
Councillor Betton's got his hand up.
Oh, Councillor Betton, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Members will remember that we've asked in previous meetings for this list of recommendations and actions, and putting emphasis on making sure things that are recommended actually get done. Following discussion with the officers, it has been suggested that in future meetings, where we have items as here highlighted in beige, the 4 of them, where the recommendation has not been carried out to completion, that the responsible or appropriate officer comes to committee to explain the reasons why the actions haven't been done. I think that serves 2 purposes. It gives members the story from the horse's mouth, and it also provides an incentive for officers in the future to actually get things done. And I think that is something worth thinking about going forward. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee.
I mentioned I had a second one, but I thought in the interest of kindness, giving way to others briefly. So I wanted to look at an item, it's the final one around cash. So if I just read it, going forward, finance should ensure that signatories should be promptly removed from the bank mandate when they leave the council. Outcome actioned by finance staff. I note it was listed as desirable as opposed to essential. Could you just talk me through how long was the gap between the departure or departures and the removal from the banking mandates?
Can you just direct me towards which line
Of
you're
course,
referring
it's
to?
the
Sorry.
last cash one. I don't have numbers on my copy, so forgive me.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, I can remember that situation. So it's my understanding that when a member of staff leaves or gives their intention to leave, then arrangements are made between the finance team and the banking partners, so in this case NatWest or Santander, to remove them from the mandate. So I've tested this annually, I would say for the last 10, 12 years. We always put a mandate test as part of the cash audit, and every time, in my experience, if a member of staff has left, the mandate information held by the council as well as the banking provider is up to date and matches the mandates within the council. For this particular one, the member of staff had left, all the arrangements and safeguards being made by the council to make sure that individual no longer had access to the council's network, payment system, the credit cards or anything like that. So there's no issue about any of that. It was just morely the administrative part of the process to make sure that the council's banking partners' records have been removed promptly.
So my understanding of a mandate with the bank is it gives you authority to act when you communicate directly with the bank, circumventing the council systems. So hence my understanding as to whether that should be desirable or essential.
So. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. My view at the time, councillor, was it was desirable because as soon as we became aware of it as part of the audit test, we had actually notified the service and they took action straight away. So there was no delay in actually implementing that. So as soon as the recommendation was made, it was being actioned. So I felt that whilst they hadn't taken prompt action before we notified them to remove that signatory from the mandate, the officer in question, all the access to the computer systems were all locked down, so they had no access to Bankline or anything like that, the council's payment system. So, as I said, it was more administrative side. Now, if they still had access to council's payment systems, for example, that's a different matter, and that would probably definitely make it an essential recommendation. But in my view, at the time, it was more administrative issue rather than a control breakdown, and that's why I made it a desirable and not an essential.
So the mandate wouldn't have allowed them to call the bank and instruct the bank to do things?
Well, they wouldn't be able to do it on their own because we'd have separation duties and we'd have dual authentication anyway. So all those, as I said, the controls hadn't broken down.
So one individual on the mandate can't trigger an action?
No, exactly, no.
Okay,
no.
That's good. Thank you very much. And I guess the other question I think here is in terms of procedures and processes, it's kind of quite a few of your findings are screaming out for something like ISO 9001 is my reading from some of these.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Betton, your hand is still up. Is that intentional? No. Okay. So the second thing that the normal chair, if I can use that phrase for you, and I discussed was whether we needed the full list of all of the items every quarter, or whether getting, as it's a rolling 18-month schedule, whether we got that once a year and it just focused each meeting on the items that were outstanding. So any views on that?
I think that's a function of practicality. I mean, if it involves the officers in more work to do it every quarter, then it's probably undesirable. But if it doesn't involve that, if this is a rolling piece of action, as it were, then why not produce it every time?
Okay, any other people? See a nod there.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar comment. It depends on the workflow, but I don't think it's, from our point of view, it's not an excessive amount to have to read, so it's quite useful to see it all, assuming that it's manageable.
Mr. Middleton, is it an excessive amount?
No, I was just going to come back on those questions. Basically, I don't see it. I see it the same amount of time. If you waited a few months to do the exercise and I engaged with all heads of service and senior management team, the amount of time it would take to get to that point is probably very similar to if I broke it down into smaller bite-sized chunks and did it every month or every 6 weeks and then reported it to members every quarter for overdue. So I think, from my point of view, the amount of time it would take to do the exercise, either in one go, taking more time, or do it in piecemeal, bite-sized chunks, is overall, it probably works out to be the same.
Okay, in that case, we'll carry on getting it each time, I think. So if we're asked to, if there's no more, Councillor Lee.
It's a superb piece of work. Thank you very much. I think we've all found it one of the more engaging and beneficial documents, and I'm sure that'll be reflected in your next review, because I think it's an outstanding piece of work. As Mr. Roberts will know, I'm happy to hold people to account, but when there's good work, it should always be called out. It's very important, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we are asked to review and note the status, and can we include that request that officers come when there's something outstanding as part of that? Are we going to, can I have agreement on that?
Sorry, can I just make sure that we're not going to be inadvertently bullying anyone or anything like that? So that wouldn't be a worry, would it?
I'm really grateful for Councillor Wilson's question. I don't think so. I think it will help to reinforce the importance that this committee gives to delivery of audit recommendations. And as you can see, there are relatively few in number, so I don't think it would be particularly onerous. And your view, Mr. Middleton, is that it's not likely to be too problematic for the individuals concerned?
I don't think so. I think it will just heighten the importance of the audit recommendations and maybe just to tune their focus on the piece of work. We appreciate, obviously, they've got 101 other priorities, but obviously bring the importance that heads of service may be aware that regular overdue audit recommendations that haven't necessarily been actioned without a plausible reason, then there could be consequences. But I would have thought by maintaining working relationships with them, as I would do on a day-to-day basis anyway, it shouldn't really cause too many problems.
And if it's any further reassurance, in other councils I've worked in where there was a history of maybe not taking audit recommendations more seriously, we implemented a similar arrangement and the compliance improved significantly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor MacDonald, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Just a very quick point, which links to all of that. If it's not for me to judge because it's the committee's decision, but if I could just suggest that perhaps anybody that needs to attends virtually, and that's accepted, and maybe also in terms of the order of the agenda, it's done in a sympathetic way for their personal lives, etc. E.g. at the front of the meeting.
A lot of nods around on that point. So
we agree with that, and perhaps that's a note to put in.
thank you. Councillor MacDonald, your hand's still up. Is So on to the final item, a bit I'm sure we've all been waiting for. I have to say, having been through the last 3 YouTubes and various others, it seemed Kafkaesque, the discussions, Pythonesque, and finally more like waiting for BDO than waiting for Godot. But anyway, I welcome Mr. Bladen from BDO. So thank you for coming along. And we were expecting, I noticed the chair said at the last meeting, oh, we've been told that somebody will be along in November, but I understand from you that you've got good news for us on field work for the audit on 29/20.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give you a brief update on where we are in terms of the 19/20 financial statements. So the position is that the Council has provided us with a full set of financial statements. We received those on the 6th of October, and our understanding is that those revised financial statements do address the issues that we have previously raised with the draft financial statements that were prepared by the Council some time ago. The key thing that we now need to do in relation to those financial statements is undertake a detailed review of those accounts. So that will be to determine whether or not they do address the issues that we previously raised, and to make sure that those financial statements or those revised financial statements comply with all of the disclosure requirements that are set out by SIPFA in their code of practice. So that work hasn't yet been done. That work will be done in January in terms of that detailed review. And as I say, that will include not just an assessment of whether those financial statements meet the requirements of the SIPFA code, but whether or not there is further work needed to be able to give us or to enable us to be able to give an opinion on those financial statements. So as I say, that work won't be done until early next year, but that's the current position on our audit of those financial statements.
So would that mean staff coming into the council to conduct field work?
So if,
from what you said,
sorry. So if that is the most efficient way of dealing with the outstanding queries that we have, then yes, people will come into the council's offices to deal with those queries. I think it's fair to say that the initial review of those accounts won't be done in the council's offices because it doesn't need to be. But if we identify that we need to do further testing and the most efficient way of doing that is to come into the council's offices, then yes, that's what we'll do.
okay, just to be contentious, what confidence can we have that date is going to happen when we understood in July that it was going to be September, and then October we understood it was going to be November, and now in December it's going to be January? What confidence can you give us on that?
So it didn't happen in September because we didn't have financial statements in September. So I think the statements that we had made previously to this committee was that we would come in when we have revised financial statements. As I say, we got those in October, so that's the reason we weren't here in September. I don't recall making any suggestions that we would be here in November. So we have, as I say, we've received those accounts in October. The next available window that we have to look at those will be in January.
Okay. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. You've, Mr. Bladen, you used the expression early next year, which you interpreted as January. I wonder if we could just have a bit firmer indication from Mr. Bladen as to precisely what is meant by early next year. Thank you.
I think, to be fair, January is quite early next year. I don't think it will be in the first 2 weeks of January because of the staff that will be involved in doing that review. So in the second 2 weeks of January, that is when I expect us to undertake that detailed review of the financial statements that I spoke about, and we will then make an assessment as to what further work we need to do.
Councillor Whitcroft.
So that's a firm commitment, definitely for January. What is the likelihood, in your view, of the additional work you just referred to being required? Are you able to express a view on that or not?
So I think there will be some further work required, primarily because there have been a number of changes to the financial statements, and we won't have audited those movements. So we will have audited the draft position, but as I say, where those financial statements have changed, there will be a change in the amounts that we will need to audit, but the exact extent of that will be determined by that first review that we will do.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. I know I'm not a member of this committee, but no one else had their hand up, so I thought I'd sneak in. 2 questions. I was a sub on this committee at the last meeting, and I vaguely remember there being a deadline of the 31st of December. Is that still the case? Because if the deadline is the 31st of December, does that mean we will not have confirmed accounts? And my second question is, I believe that we've supplied financial statements on a number of occasions, and I'd be interested to find out why what we supplied wasn't correct in September, but it was okay in October. So I'd just like to get an understanding, because I know it's been going on for a while. Thank you. Thanks.
In terms of the first question around the 31st of December deadline, there was a letter that came out from DLUC back in July 23 or earlier this year that set out the kind of set out a range of proposals for reducing the backlog of local government audits that have not yet been completed. And as part of that, it was indicated that there would be a range of statutory backstop dates that would enable auditors to, in some instances, it might be that auditors would issue a disclaimed audit opinion on a set of financial statements in order to try to get auditors to be able to audit the latest set of financial statements, which is what I think everybody would be keen to see. Unfortunately, the legislative framework that is needed to bring that into place wasn't, or still hasn't yet been put in place. So there isn't yet a statutory backstop date of the 31st of December. That was envisaged that would be for 2019-20 accounts. I don't know when there will be some proposals coming out that will enable those statutory backstop dates to be enabled or enacted. It will require the NAO to change their code of audit practice, and they will need to consult on that, and it will require probably some form of legislation by way of a statutory instrument. So my guess is, given there isn't anything yet that has been consulted on, it will be some time before we see those statutory backstop dates, but I don't know when they will be, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. I just want to check my understanding. So, DLUC, which I think is the department our MP is responsible for, Michael Gove, issued a set of backstop dates, but then hasn't enacted the statutory requirements to actually get that to happen. And that will imply that the external auditors who are supposed to do this work and the local authorities responsible for supporting making that work happen won't be able to hit the deadline. Do I understand the thread correctly, Mr. Bladen?
So there isn't any statutory backstop dates at the moment. So there aren't any backstop dates that we are working to. When those backstop dates come into play, I'm assuming that they will be staged and that they will be sometime into the future. So there will be sufficient time for auditors to do what they need to do to be able to meet those statutory backstop dates.
Okay, thank you. Which department is responsible for that?
So ultimately, it is DLUC that is responsible for that, but there are a number of other stakeholders that are working with DLUC to bring that arrangement into place. So, in particular, the National Audit Office, who are revising the Code of Audit Practice. Financial Reporting Council are involved in that as regulator for the accounting profession. The audit firms are feeding into that as well and making their views known. So there are a number of stakeholders that are feeding into those discussions, but ultimately it is DLUC that will take the legislation through, or whatever legislation is needed, they will take that through.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, as a member of this council, and I should add, I'm a substitute member tonight, so my knowledge of this isn't huge. But as a member of this council, I'm not particularly interested in backstop dates. I'm certainly not interested in the nuts and bolts of how those backstop dates are calculated and who has input into it, and so on and so forth. What I'm interested in is actually getting residents, and we've had one here this evening, who are very concerned about the issues associated with the audit. I am concerned about getting satisfaction to those sorts of residents, and some sort of openness in the process. It seems to me that from what you're saying, although you're going to do the first part of the necessary process by the end of January, we could still end up not having signed off accounts until some unknown date into the future. Do you think we're going to get signed off accounts for 19/20, let's say by June of next year?
So the work that we will do in the early part of next year that's intended to enable us to be able to get to a position where we can issue an audit opinion on the 2019-20 financial statements. Sorry, have I misunderstood your question, Councillor?
I don't think you've misunderstood it. I'm not sure you've answered it, but I'll leave it to colleagues to determine that.
Okay. Councillor Cope.
Thanks, Chair. This is a slightly follow-up to Councillor Whitcock's question there. So obviously you've said there's roughly 2 weeks' work to be done in January to get to a position where you come to the council and say, we've got a few more questions, we need this, this and this. Are we then going to be in a situation where the council comes back, gives its replies, and we've got to find another sort of slot in BDO's calendar where you've got the resource to actually look at those answers? So I'm just concerned that, we come back and it comes back to you and then you say, well, our next window to look at this is in, June, July. Is that a risk that we need to consider?
So the way that we've scheduled our resources is to have someone available to do that review of the accounts in the last couple of weeks of January. I'm not saying it will take 2 weeks, it is. And then there are resources available to follow on from that work to pick up any other work that is needed. So it's not saying we'll do the review of the accounts, then you'll wait, and then we'll come back.
So can I just confirm that when you talk about that additional resource, that's resource to deal with the council's responses to any inquiries arising from your initial work, assuming that there isn't something huge?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Again?
Just a very different question, probably just for my benefit and possibly for the benefit of other people who aren't savvy auditors. We heard obviously from the public speaker tonight, and it's been mentioned a few times, this concept of a disclaimed audit. Could you just explain what that means and what any consequence, were we to end up with that, would be?
So a disclaimed audit opinion is in effect no opinion on those financial statements at all. So the auditor would not be giving an opinion. They would be, as I say, issuing a disclaimed opinion. So they would be saying they're not able to offer any assurance over those financial statements. It's unclear. It's at the moment, in the absence of the statutory framework to enable us to do that, it's unclear as to how many sets of accounts we would need to do that over.
Quickly follow up. So is there any difference in practice between a disclaimed audit and not having any audit at all?
In terms of the level of assurance that you get over those financial statements, then no.
Thank you. Councillor Lee. And then Councillor Wilson. Councillor Lee was slightly first.
I've got a couple of questions, so maybe I'll do one and then hand over to Councillor Wilson. So picking up on Councillor Johnny Cope's point around a disclaimed audit, obviously if it's a disclaimed audit, you then can't depend on those closing balances from those accounts because they've been disclaimed. How long, or what's the process to get to a point where you've got balances you can rely on? Where I'm getting from at the moment is, at the moment, obviously we heard from Mr. Bob Watson that we're unable to provide us with draft accounts at the moment because we haven't had these accounts audited. But if they're going to end up being disclaimed, is that then going to mean that he can't rely on any balances anyway? And if that cascades forward for a number of sets of accounts, how far forward do you go with disclaimed accounts before you can then have normal audited accounts again? What's that window and process, just for our minds?
So I think the answer to that is a little unclear at the moment because we don't have the statutory framework that will set out how many sets of accounts that we might be in a position to have to disclaim. And I also don't know what work your subsequent auditors will do because you have new auditors from 23, 24 financial year. So it will depend to a certain extent what work they would be doing on the opening balances. But ordinarily, if you've got a qualification or a disclaimed audit opinion on one set of financial statements, then it's quite likely that the opening balances on the subsequent year would also be qualified. And it might take a number of years to be able to get sufficient assurance over the in-year transactions to be able to clear that qualification. But it's unclear at the moment as to exactly how long that would take. But it would likely be, you would likely have a qualification for more than 1 year.
So let's say all of the BDO audit balances are qualified. That would then mean that the first set of accounts under the new auditors would have to be qualified as well, because they wouldn't have confidence in those closing balances handed over to them. So we're potentially into the second year of audit before we get what we consider to be normal confident audited accounts. One other question just to tip into. So in Eastleigh, for example, they've published all of their draft accounts, even though they don't have the audit in place yet, as it were. Do you see any special reason why we don't have our draft accounts published at the moment? I'm just keen to get to the nub of why some local authorities are publishing them and some are not. Is there any material reason why you'd be like, I understand why we've not published draft accounts yet?
I understand that a number of councils do publish draft accounts for even unaudited years. It's probably, again, a question for Mr. Watson to answer.
Thank you.
Mr. Watson, did you have a comment on that?
No, Mr. Bladen picked to the point about that when you have a disclaimed account, your opening balances will normally be qualified by the next audit, and they would then form an opinion at the end of it. So hopefully, after that first qualification year, they will have balances at the end of that year they have some confidence in. When you do change auditors, they do tend to look back at the prior year because they will place a fair amount of assurance on the previous audit firm, but they also then tend to do their own checks as well. So depending on what comes out from the department in terms of the statutory backstops and the ability to disclaim, we would then look at seeing, well, what does the new auditors want to do?
Councillor Lee.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson. So if our new auditors would ordinarily place reliance on the previous audited accounts, but they're not properly audited, that presumably means they can't do that. So what's the financial implication for the council if additional effort is required if they can't rely on a previous year's accounts? Are we looking at another cost coming over the hill?
As I said, generally when you change auditors, they do place some reliance, but they also go back and do their own audit of the previous year, not a full audit, but just confirm that they're happy where it goes. So they will look at the accounts. That was factored into the audit fee initially when they come through. But again, audit fees currently are being set by PSAA, who are setting them there. So generally, depending on, they had to do extra work, they have the ability to request an extra fee, and that extra fee is then put forward a PSAA current situation, and the Section 151 officer of the council then gets the ability to put their point of view across, and PSAA will set the fee that's to be paid. So yes, there could be extra fees around it. I would hope that if accounts are being disclaimed because they haven't got the time, resource to audit, we're not paying the full fee for that one.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, I'll come back to you if we...
Thank you. Just a question about the system of disclaimed accounts. Obviously, it can't happen yet because the legislation hasn't been passed. If the Department for Levelling Up passes this legislation, could it actually be helpful to the council to have these statutory backstop dates and have a number of years, perhaps, of disclaimed accounts? Because at least it would get them out of the way, and then we could eventually get to a point where we can have a year where there's properly audited accounts with everything being done properly, but after a few years of disclaimed accounts. Could it be helpful?
So I think people have their own views on that. I think my own view is that the key thing, I think what people are interested in is understanding what a council's current position is, and having the most recent set of financial statements audited is probably of the most benefit to stakeholders, be my own view.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, because we're 4 years now of unaudited accounts. So if we had, say, 2 or 3 years of disclaimed accounts, and this year or last year of proper unqualified accounts, at least we'd be in the position we want to get to. But obviously we wouldn't know what happened in the previous years, but at least it's something that could possibly be easier. Is that right?
Yeah, as I say, I think it would be helpful to get to the latest position, the most recent position. I think there's something like over 900 sets of local authority financial statements that haven't been audited yet. So having assurance, as I keep repeating, on the most recent set of financial statements is probably the thing that is most valuable. I think it is just worth reflecting as well that one of the things that we don't yet know is that auditors will have a value for money responsibility to identify significant weaknesses in things like governance arrangements, financial sustainability. We don't yet know what the proposals will be in relation to that, and we may still have to do some work around that and do some reporting, which again might be helpful for members and stakeholders.
I have a question, actually. If, heaven forbid, the government was even behind where it plans to be, and that statutory backstop just disappears into the far distance, perhaps after an election, when do you think we'd look at the next set of SHBC accounts being audited? Assuming that broadly by mid-February we're all smiling and cheering and enjoying champagne.
So if there were no backstop dates and we were just carrying on as normal, I don't think we would be able to start looking at a set of 2021 financial statements until it would be after September 24. It wouldn't be before then. And it would probably be 25 into 2025 before that audit was completed, if it was a full audit that we were doing.
Thank you, I think. Members, do we have any more questions from Mr. Bladen? Oh, Councillor Whitcroft.
Very briefly, just a couple of factual issues. To your knowledge, has this council ever had a disclaimed audit before? That's the first question. And on a scale of 1 to 10, in your opinion, what would be the likelihood of the 1920 audit ending with a disclaimed outcome? please.
So the answer to the first question is, as far as I'm aware, no disclaimed audit opinion has ever been given. In terms of the second question, we have already done a certain amount of work on the council's financial statements that would enable us to give some assurance. So if we weren't able to give a full clean audit opinion, then I suspect our opinion would be qualified in some way, so which would give a level of assurance, but not a full level of assurance. But it's difficult at this stage, because the audit's still in progress and not complete, to say exactly what that would be.
Actually, I've just remembered one more question. Sorry, it'll be a brief one. I think you've already said it in effect, but I saw on the email thread, I think, that at the beginning of October, you did say you had everything you needed. You had every answers to all the questions, and there was nothing else left. And unless you found something when looking.
So we had previously raised a number of questions and queries on the draft set of financial statements that we had. So we have discussed those with officers and their responses to those questions. And we now have a full set of financial statements, including all of the notes. So that's what I meant by that statement in my email. That's not to say that we won't raise further questions when we review those accounts.
Thank you. Any more? In that case, do we actually have to?
Just say that concludes business for this meeting.
So in that case, concludes the business for this meeting. Thanks everybody for the time.